I'm Rachel Monroe, 33 years old, and after 10 years of silence, I walked through the front doors of the Monroe family's country club with a black dress and a manila folder in my hand. My sister Emily was about to walk down the aisle, her wedding gown sparkling in the late afternoon sun, and not one person there knew who I really was anymore. Not the guests sipping champagne. Not my mother adjusting her pearls, and certainly not my father, standing at the altar, praising family values. I took a deep breath as the wedding planner called for the next speaker and stepped forward toward the microphone. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to find the strength to walk back into a room that once erased you. I grew up in Fairfield, Connecticut, where every house had a manicured lawn and the front porch smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. My father, Richard, was a cardiothoracic surgeon, the kind with 3 framed degrees in his office and an entire hospital wing with his name on it. My mother, Catherine, planned charity auctions and spent her days organizing luncheons that always looked perfect in photographs. We had a 6-bedroom colonial with a heated pool and backyard tennis court. But the house rarely felt like home. My sister Emily was born 3 years after me, and for a long time she was my shadow. I braided her hair before school, read her stories under the covers at night, and chased off the girls who teased her at Westfield Prep. She called me Ray Ray and used to swear we'd be bridesmaids in each other's weddings. Someday I believed her. I also believed for a while that our family was normal, even when I started noticing things I wasn't supposed to. My father's late surgeries that always lined up with his young nurses' shifts, his change in tone whenever the phone rang past midnight. I was 14 when I first heard him whisper to someone who wasn't my mother when I asked about it. He slapped me hard across the face and told me never to speak of it again. After that, things changed. I stopped playing along and started pushing back. I dyed my hair dark, snuck out past curfew, refused to sit quiet at dinner while he talked about integrity. Emily went the opposite way. She clung to him, excelled in every class, volunteered at every event, and became the daughter he liked to introduce at conferences. I became the one he forgot to mention. By the time I turned 18, I was barely visible to them. Emily begged me to just stop making waves. She said it would be easier for everyone if I pretended along with the rest of them. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. Not. After everything I'd seen, not when he kept hurting people, and no one else seemed to care. The final straw came on my 18th birthday. My father had arranged a formal dinner at the country club. I hadn't wanted it, but appearances mattered more than comfort. I caught him kissing the event coordinator in his office when I went to look for champagne. Something inside me broke. I stood up during dessert, clinked my glass, and thanked him for everything he had done, his surgeries, his reputation, and his very active affair with the woman. Standing 3 tables over, the room went silent. My mother stared at her wine glass. My sister whispered that I had ruined everything. My father smiled with his teeth, but not his eyes. 30 minutes later, I was no longer a Monroe. He cut off my cards, my car, and my access handed me $500 in cash and said, "Don't come back as far as we're concerned. You're dead to us." Now, that night I packed a backpack and walked out into the October dark. No one stopped me. I spent the first night curled up on a bench at the Fairfield bus station, my backpack under my head for a pillow. A security guard walked past once but didn't stop. I kept my eyes shut until morning, hoping that if I stayed still enough, the ache in my chest would settle. Over the next few weeks. I floated from couch to couch. Classmates from high school let me stay for a night or two, but their parents always found a reason why I couldn't stay longer. I learned which fast food places wouldn't kick you out, if you bought a small coffee, and how long I could stay warm at the library without drawing attention. I cleaned locker rooms at a gym for shower access, stocked grocery shelves overnight, and ran a register at a 24-hour gas station. During the day, I didn't sleep much, not because I didn't want to, but because there was nowhere quiet enough to do it safely. I kept moving, always tired, always hungry. 6 months later, I fell asleep at work, my head against the register while the receipt printer ran nonstop. My manager fired me on the spot. Said he had no choice. It was company policy. That night I sat in the corner of a bus station, huddled in a sweatshirt that smelled like fryer grease, watching my reflection in the vending machine glass. Everything I owned fit inside one torn backpack. I had $23 left in cash. I don't remember how long I sat there, but I remember the promise I made to myself. If I ever got out of this, I wouldn't just survive, I'd build a life that could never be taken from me again. The next morning, I walked into Hartford Community College, my hair still damp from the gym showers, and asked to speak with an admissions counselor. My high school transcripts were strong enough to qualify me for a scholarship. The woman behind the desk looked surprised but kind. She handed me a stack of papers and said, I'd need a job too. Probably more than one. I found a room to rent in a peeling old house with 4 other students and shared a bathroom with all of them. The plumbing rattled the windows, stuck in the winter, and the rent was barely manageable. Even with 3 jobs, I worked mornings at a coffee shop, afternoons shelving books at the campus library, and weekends at a restaurant on the edge of town. My schedule was brutal class, from 8 to 2 shift work until midnight study, until 3, and then sleep in 2-hour stretches. But I did it because the only thing worse than being exhausted was being dependent on anyone named Monroe. Second semester, I signed up for an elective called Introduction to Law. It sounded practical, and the professor's name was familiar. Linda Harris had published articles in major journals and appeared on television once to speak about federal corruption cases. She was sharp and calm and didn't tolerate nonsense. I got the highest score on our first exam, and she asked me to stay after class to talk. Her office was small and smelled like coffee and eucalyptus. You've got a clear mind for this, she said, looking over her glasses, but you look like you're running on fumes. I tried to make a joke out of it, but before I knew it, the whole story came spilling out the ultimatum. The night I left the jobs, the couch surfing, the bus stations. I expected her to look shocked, or maybe to tell me she was sorry. Instead, she nodded and said I was homeless too. In my 20s, that moment changed everything. She didn't give me money or make promises. She just listened and offered real help. She helped me apply for more grants and made sure I had food in the fridge when she invited me over for dinner. She never asked questions. I wasn't ready to answer. You have fire, she said once. Don't waste it on bitterness. Use it to build something real. When I graduated from Hartford, I had a paralegal certification and an acceptance letter to Columbia Law. Linda co-signed my student loan when the partial scholarship didn't cover everything she told me to pay it forward. Someday law school was harder, but I wasn't doing it alone anymore. I had stable housing, enough to eat, and someone checking in every now and then, just to make sure I was still breathing. I worked part-time at a legal aid office and started focusing on healthcare fraud. Something about it made sense. The math, the paper trails, the lives buried behind billing codes after graduation. I joined Donovan Wright and Pearson, a firm in Manhattan with a reputation for biting down hard and not letting go. I started at the bottom. Long nights, document review, lunch runs for senior partners. But I stayed late, volunteered for the messiest cases, and learned fast. By my 5th year, I was the youngest junior partner in the firm's history. I had a quiet apartment in Brooklyn, a closet of fitted suits, and more respect than I'd ever had in my own home. Then came the file. William Donovan dropped it on my desk one Monday morning, thick with documents and Post-it notes. He didn't smile much. But that day, he looked impressed. Possible Medicare fraud, he said, cardiac procedures, billing irregularities, kickbacks from device companies, all right up your alley. I flipped it open without thinking and froze halfway down the first page. Who's the primary target? I asked, even though I already knew doctor. Richard Monroe, he said, chief of cardiology at Princeton Medical Group. Been running the show for over a decade. His numbers don't add up. I stared at the photo stapled to the file. His smile hadn't changed much, older now, gray at the temples, but still playing the part of savior. The paper slipped from my hands. You okay? William asked. I nodded. Yeah, just caught off guard. I've heard of him that night. I sat in my apartment and read every page slowly. The same man who once told me I was dead to him now stood at the center of a financial scheme so massive it could land him in federal court. He had built his reputation on invasive surgeries, most of them unnecessary. The file was filled with patterns of double billing, falsified test results, patient complications, kickbacks from companies overseas. My first instinct was to recuse myself, but then I thought of something else. Who better to take this apart than the person who knew his patterns, his arrogance? The way he smiled when he lied for 6 months. I worked the case, kept my name off every official memo, and focused on the facts. I interviewed former nurses, billing assistants, and patients. I traced the money from his hands into offshore accounts and fake nonprofits. I didn't tell anyone, not even Linda. Not at first. The case was nearly ready when the invitation came. A cream-colored envelope with calligraphy across the front, addressed to Rachel Monroe inside, was an invitation to Emily's wedding scheduled for 3 weeks from now at the Greenwich Country Club, the same venue where I last saw my family. A note in handwriting I recognized immediately was tucked inside. "I know we have history," it said, "but I want my sister at my wedding. Please come, Emily." I held the card for a long time, unsure whether to laugh or cry. After all these years, after being cut off and erased, they wanted me back for a celebration. I wasn't sure what was more surprising, the invitation or how fast I considered saying yes. The envelope sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days. Every morning, I passed it on my way to the coffee maker, and every night I set it aside again, not quite ready to decide what to do with it. By the 4th day, I called Linda Harris and asked if she could meet me for dinner. She chose a quiet place in the village, the kind with dim lighting and cloth napkins that never needed ironing. When she saw the invitation in my hand, she didn't say anything at first, just waited. "I'm almost finished with the case," I said. "But this changes things." She read the card slowly, flipped it over, looked at the handwritten note, then set it down. "You should have recused yourself the moment you saw your father's name," she said evenly. "But the case stands on its own now. The evidence would have been found with or without you." I nodded. "So what do I do about the wedding?" She didn't answer right away. She took a sip of wine and watched the rain gathering on the window ledge. "Maybe your sister wants to make peace. Maybe your father suspects something. Maybe the Caldwells want a clean record before the marriage. Either way, it's not nothing that they sent this to you." Now that night, I lay awake in bed, memories coming faster than I could stop them. Emily and I playing in the snow, our mother singing as she brushed my hair, my father's steady hands holding the back of my bike until I didn't need them. I woke from a dream with my heart pounding, a ballroom, a microphone Emily. In white, my father's face turning gray, I couldn't shake the image. By the end of the week, I still hadn't decided whether I'd go or not, so I scheduled a session with Dr. Winters, the therapist who'd helped me work through the harder parts of my past. She asked a single question. "What are you hoping to get from being there?" I said. "Closure." But the word didn't feel quite right. After a long pause, I admitted what I hadn't told anyone. I want them to see who I've become, and maybe I want justice too. She nodded. "You're human, Rachel. The question is whether acting on those feelings brings healing or more pain." I spent the next few nights running through possibilities I could attend and keep the investigation secret. I could send a polite note and stay in Brooklyn, or I could show up and let the truth speak for itself. A week later, I called Agent Sarah Taylor at the Bureau. She had worked with me on previous cases and respected clean process. We met in her downtown office under the buzzing lights of the federal building. "I brought everything. There's something I didn't disclose," I said. "And you need to hear it from me first." I explained the family connection, the reason I hadn't recused the timing of the invitation, and where the investigation stood. Now she listened without interrupting, then closed the file. "This could compromise the case." She said. "The defense will push hard on conflict of interest, but the evidence is solid," I said. "Every record, every testimony, every financial trail stands." Without me, we agreed on terms. The Bureau would continue its case separately if I chose to speak to my family privately. That was my decision. But any public statement could risk the legal process. "We're close to securing a warrant." She said no more than 2 weeks. I thanked her and left the building into early fall air. The next day I began preparing. I bought a black dress with clean lines and subtle tailoring. Nothing too flashy, but nothing forgettable either. I made hair and nail appointments, reserved a room at a hotel a mile from the venue. I gave my itinerary to Linda and to Natalie, my assistant just in case, and told them if they didn't hear from me by Sunday to call Agent Taylor. I packed the manila folder with the core documents, nothing that would interfere with the FBI's work, but enough to hold weight. If the moment came, On Friday night, my phone rang. It was a number from Connecticut. I hesitated but answered. "Rachel, it's Emily." Her voice was older but familiar enough to catch me off guard. "I wanted to be sure you got the invitation and to say, I really hope you'll come," I said. "I'd be there," and she sounded relieved. "There's so much I want to talk to you about." I didn't know what to say, so I just said, "We'll have time after we hung up." I sat in silence for a while, unsure if I had made a mistake. The next morning I drove north, the trees along the interstate just starting to turn gold and red. I checked into the Madison Hotel under the name Rachel Lawson. Not ready to carry Monroe yet, not until I had to. I drove past our old house, a different car in the driveway, and new curtains in the windows. I passed the rehearsal dinner venue and saw them through the window. Emily, in a pale blue dress, my father in a tuxedo, my mother sipping something from a flute glass. They looked like a family, whole perfect. Celebrated that night. I rehearsed what I might say, standing in front of the mirror, words coming and going, none of them feeling right. I woke early the next day, nerves already stirring. Breakfast sat untouched on the hotel tray. I showered, did my hair slowly applied, makeup, carefully stepped into the dress and checked my reflection. I didn't look like the girl they'd sent away 10 years ago, but when I closed my eyes, she was still there at noon. I called for a car, Greenwich Country Club. I told the driver ceremony entrance as we pulled up. The valet opened the door. Flower arrangements taller than children lined the walkway. White columns framed the glass doors. The sound of a string quartet floated through the air at the front. A woman with a tablet asked for my name. Rachel Monroe. She blinked and flagged down someone else. "You're on the priority list." The coordinator came quickly, smiling politely. "Miss Monroe, I'm Frances," the bride asked. "That you be escorted in personally? Would you like to see her before the ceremony?" "No, thank you. I'll just take my seat." She offered me the choice of sitting up front with the family or toward the back. "Back is fine." The garden was filling up slowly. I chose a seat in the last row near the aisle. Easy to leave if I needed to. Nearby guests murmured softly. Old neighbors, doctors from the hospital, political donors in navy suits, women in floral dresses. Someone called my name quietly, Rachel. I turned and saw Aunt Caroline, my mother's sister. "My goodness, it is you. You look so grown up," I nodded. 10 years will do that." She hugged me briefly, then stepped back, awkward. "Such a shame, everything that happened. But water under the bridge now, right?" She didn't wait for an answer, just smiled and moved on. I overheard her whispering to someone behind her. "That's the one who ran off. The troubled one." The label sat heavy as I made my way inside, looking for a restroom to collect myself in the marble-floored ladies' lounge. I splashed cold water on my wrists and looked into the mirror. The door opened and I saw her reflection. Before she spoke, my mother. Catherine stood in the doorway, hand frozen on the knob. Her hair had faded to gray, her frame smaller than I remembered. She recovered quickly and smiled tightly. "You came, Emily invited me." She stepped closer carefully. "She'll be glad you're here. Let's not make a scene. Today's important." "I'm not here to make a scene. I'm just here." She looked me over, top to bottom, her eyes landing on the dress, the heels, the ring on my finger. "What are you doing now?" "I'm an attorney partner in a firm in Manhattan." She blinked, pride flickering, then caution. "Your father will be surprised to see you. I'm counting on it." A woman entered then, and my mother took the chance to leave, murmuring that we'd talk more later. I wasn't sure if we would. I left the lounge and walked the hallway slowly, unsure where to go next, until I reached a door covered in flowered paper that said, "Emily's Special Day." I knocked lightly. "Come in." Emily sat in a white gown, champagne glass in hand. Her bridesmaids scattered around her. When she saw me, she stood slowly, glass still halfway to her lips. "You really came?" Emily set her glass on the vanity and stepped closer, the layers of her dress rustling softly with each movement. The bridesmaids exchanged glances, then excused themselves one by one, leaving the room quiet but charged. I almost didn't come. I said she didn't answer right away, just reached for my hand and pulled me toward the velvet settee by the window. We sat side by side, the bustle of the wedding just outside the door. "I wouldn't have blamed you if you hadn't," she said, "but I hoped you would." I looked at her, not sure what to believe. Why invite me now after 10 years? She adjusted her skirt carefully before answering. "It wasn't 10 years of silence on my part. The first year after you left, I hired someone to find you. I spent everything I'd saved." I raised my eyebrows. "Dad found out?" she continued. "He told me if I didn't stop, he'd pull my college tuition. So I tried other ways. I sent letters to Julie's place and to your old work addresses. I messaged your old accounts." I shook my head. "I deleted all of it when I left. I figured that out eventually," she said quietly, "but I never stopped wanting to fix it. I just didn't know how." We sat there for a long moment, neither of us sure what to say next. "So this is about the Caldwells," I asked, "making sure everything looks tidy before the wedding." "No," she said quickly. "This is about me wanting you here. I'm about to start a new chapter, and I didn't want to do it while pretending you don't exist." I studied her expression. "Then why now?" "And not before." She hesitated, then said, "Mom's sick." I blinked. "How sick?" "Stage 4, she said. "They don't know how long, maybe a few months." The words settled between us, slowly. I didn't answer right away, just nodded. "She wanted to make it to the wedding," Emily added. "That was her goal." She searched my face. "You really didn't know. I haven't been following any of you," I said. "I built something without needing to." There was a knock at the door. The wedding planner's voice called from the hallway. 5 minutes Emily stood and adjusted the hem of her gown. "Will you stay through the reception?" I nodded. "I'm not going anywhere yet." She smiled and squeezed my hand. "Thank you for coming. It means everything to me." As I stepped out of the bridal suite, my thoughts spun faster than I could settle them. Her apology, her explanation, the diagnosis. None of it fit the story I had held on to for a decade. I was so distracted I didn't notice the man standing near the corner until I nearly ran into him. My father. His tuxedo was flawless, his hair silvered but sharp, his posture still straight as ever. He froze when he saw me, and for a second his face cracked. Surprise, anger, and calculation all flickered through his expression. "What are you doing here?" he asked low and sharp. "I was invited," I said by Emily. His eyes narrowed without consulting me. "It's her wedding," I said. "Not yours." He scanned the hall, checking who was within earshot. "We should speak privately." "No need," I replied. "I'm just here for the ceremony and the reception. I'll be gone tomorrow." "Why now?" he asked in a whisper. After all this time I met his gaze. Maybe I missed my family, or maybe I was curious about the man. Emily's marrying the Caldwells are quite a name in politics. He flinched slightly. "Whatever you're thinking of doing," he said. "Don't. This day is bigger than us. Isn't it always?" He stepped closer. "How did they even let you in? You weren't on the final list." I smiled. "Emily overruled you. She wanted her sister here." Before he could reply, another man walked up quickly. I recognized him from old photos, Richard Porter, his attorney. "They're ready for you to walk Emily down the aisle," Porter said, then turned to me. "Is this your daughter? She's leaving shortly." My father said, "Actually, I'll be staying table 3, family seating." The color drained from his face. He turned back to Porter, who gave a curt nod before whispering something I couldn't hear. They moved off toward the ceremony space together, Porter looking tense, my father tight-lipped. I followed a few steps behind my seat, still in the last row where I could watch everything unfold without being pulled in. Emily walked down the aisle to soft strings, her eyes locked on Daniel Caldwell, who stood with the kind of smile that photographs. Well, my father handed her off with practiced grace and said all the right things. The ceremony was simple. Elegant vows exchanged, rings slipped into place, applause rising on cue from rows of well-dressed guests as the crowd transitioned toward the reception. I stayed back, watching guests filter toward the terrace. Servers offered glasses of champagne, while laughter rose around the canapes. I noticed my father scanning the crowd, more than once, his gaze always finding me. He stood near Porter. Each time they spoke, they looked uneasy. My mother walked past me twice, her eyes flickering my way before moving on. She didn't speak in the ballroom table. 3 sat near the front where the Caldwells were already seated. I took the last open seat beside Emily's new in-laws. Senator Caldwell smiled politely. "So you're the big sister we've heard so little about." "I am," I said. "Emily tells us you're an attorney in Manhattan. Impressive path." "Thank you," I said. "I focus on financial crimes." My father choked softly on his drink. "Fascinating work," the senator said. "Any memorable cases? I just closed one on medical billing fraud, unnecessary surgeries, fake records, payments routed through shell companies. The usual." My father tightened his jaw. My mother stared down at her plate. "Vital work," said Mrs. Caldwell. "Those people hurt the most vulnerable." "I agree," I said before the conversation could continue. The wedding planner announced the speeches. My father stood and adjusted his jacket, then walked to the front microphone. He spoke about Emily, her intelligence, her kindness, their family legacy, the value of commitment. His words landed exactly where he wanted them to. Soft applause followed each line. I watched his hands, the rhythm of his voice, the polished delivery that had convinced patients and boards for years. When he stepped back, the planner smiled, and now the maid of honor. I stood. "I'd like to say something." The planner hesitated. "You're not on the list, Miss Monroe. I'm the bride's sister. That should count for something." Emily gave a nod, and the planner stepped aside. I walked to the microphone and paused. The room quieted slowly until all I could hear was the buzz of overhead lights and the soft chime of a fork falling onto china. For those who don't know me, I'm Rachel Monroe, Emily's older sister. I let the silence stretch, long enough for a few murmurs to ripple through the room. Some of you may be wondering why I haven't been at any family events in the last 10 years. I looked across the tables into faces that hadn't seen me since I was 17 on my 18th birthday. My father gave me a choice: keep quiet about certain family matters or leave the house permanently. I left with $500 in a backpack. Gasps rippled. Someone dropped a glass. For the first year, I was homeless, working 3 jobs, putting myself through school, never once hearing from a single member of this family. I looked at Emily, tears in her eyes, Daniel holding her hand, my mother with her head down. My father was frozen. Porter beside him whispering quickly today, "I stand here not for revenge, but because it's time to stop pretending." I reached into my folder and pulled out a single document, then looked directly at my father. "The evidence will speak for itself. The man in that folder," I said into the microphone, "is Dr. Richard Monroe, the man who stood here a moment ago and spoke about family values and legacy. He's under investigation for medical fraud and patient harm." The room erupted. Chairs scraped against the floor. Silverware clinked nervously against plates. A woman near the back gasped loudly. I held up a paper from the folder. "I have documentation showing years of unnecessary cardiac procedures, fake test results, and money funneled through shell companies linked to medical device kickbacks. 12 patients died." My father stepped forward, but 2 men in dress uniforms, friends of Daniel's, moved to block his path. Porter tried to wave them down, but they didn't budge. "She's mentally unstable." My father shouted, "This is all revenge. She was disowned for cause and has no credibility." I kept my voice steady. "The original documents are with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The case has been building independently of my work for 6 months." As if on cue, the ballroom doors opened. Agent Sarah Taylor walked in with 2 more agents. "Dr. Richard Monroe," she announced, "you are under arrest for healthcare fraud, wire fraud, and criminal negligence resulting in death. Please step forward." The guests froze. Phones came out. Hands rose instinctively to record. Senator Caldwell stood slowly, his face pale. Daniel looked at Emily, who hadn't moved from her chair. My father turned toward Porter. "Do something." But Porter was already stepping back, hands raised slightly. "Richard, I need to speak with counsel before advising my mother." Slumped in her seat, a staff member hurried to her side, calling for medical assistance. Emily stood and made her way toward me, carefully gathering the train of her dress as she crossed the room. "Why?" she whispered when she reached me. "Why here? Why now?" I looked at her and saw something I hadn't expected. Relief behind the tears, as if something inside her had finally snapped free. "You knew," I said softly. "Not everything, but enough." She looked away. I suspected inconsistencies. Things he said that didn't feel right. But I never imagined this Senator Caldwell called her name from the doorway. "Emily, we're leaving now." Daniel stepped toward us. "My father wants this dealt with immediately. He's already discussing damage control and annulment options." Emily looked from him to me, then to the ballroom where guests whispered behind their hands. "Tell him I'll be out shortly," she said. A nurse approached Miss Monroe. "Your mother is asking for you both. She's in the lounge area." We followed her through a side hallway where our mother lay on a velvet couch, her skin pale, the oxygen mask shifting with each breath. She looked up when we entered and removed the mask with a trembling hand. "My girls," she said together again. Emily knelt beside her, still in her wedding gown. "Mom, just rest." "No," our mother said firmly. "I need to speak now." She turned to me. "First, Rachel, I knew about the affairs and the money, not everything, but enough. I stayed because I was afraid and sick and didn't know how to leave." Her eyes closed briefly, then opened again. "When you exposed him, I should have stood beside you. Instead, I looked away. I've regretted that every day." She turned to Emily. "And you, my perfect daughter who followed all the rules, I watched you become what I was, living in a house of performance. Be careful of the cage you're choosing." A hospice nurse stepped forward. "We need to transfer her for evaluation. Now she shouldn't be moved without clearance before they took her." My mother gripped my hand tightly. "The letters," she whispered. "They're in my blue jewelry box. I kept them from both of you." I tried to ask what she meant, but the nurse was already helping her onto the stretcher. Emily and I stood silently in the hallway as they wheeled her away through a window. We could see the ballroom still half-filled, agents taking statements. Porter on the phone, my father being led to a federal vehicle. Emily's voice broke the silence. She said letters. "I don't know what she meant," I said. "But I want to find out." Daniel stepped back into the hallway. His tie loosened his face. Tense. "Emily, my parents are in full crisis mode. They want you at the hotel in an hour. There's a press conference planned for tomorrow. They want me to lie," she said flatly to look shocked and distance myself. He nodded. "The team has a statement prepared. If you refuse, they'll push for annulment immediately, and you could be liable for campaign damages," she said. Nothing later that evening. We sat in my apartment. The city quiet outside. Emily held a small blue box in her lap, the velvet worn at the corners. The clasp, stiff with age inside, were 3 bundles of envelopes wrapped in faded rubber bands. The first had my name on them, written in her handwriting, postmarked every week for a year. The second were from our mother, to me, all unsent. The third were from me to Emily, my early letters from the shelters, from school, from my first job. She looked at them. "I never saw these. I never got yours either." We sat for hours reading each note slowly. Her apologies, my updates, our mother's regrets. It was all there. "She let us think we abandoned each other," Emily said finally. "Why control?" I said Dad always managed the story. The silence made it easier. She nodded. "He told me you were unstable, that any contact would only hurt you, and that if I reached out, he'd cut me off financially." We sat in silence until her phone rang again. It was a man from the Caldwell campaign. She put it on speaker. "Emily, we need you here first thing tomorrow. We'll run the statement and go over questions. You'll appear supportive but distanced." "What if I don't come?" she asked, a pause. "Then you'll be in breach of your prenup. The annulment would be swift and costly." After she hung up, she looked around my apartment, a modest space with clean lines and warm light. "You really did it," she said. "You built a life from nothing." "Not nothing," I said, "but not with their help. Can I stay here for a few nights as long as you need that night?" She slept in the guest room, and I lay awake remembering her letters. One line had repeated over and over. "I miss my sister." The morning after the wedding, Amanda stood in my kitchen, still wearing the clothes from the night before, her hair pulled back hastily, her wedding ring absent from her hand. She poured coffee into a mug and leaned against the counter, staring out the window. "The Caldwells canceled the honeymoon," she said quietly. "The press conference is still scheduled for noon. They want me to appear with Daniel and read a statement. Someone else wrote about how blindsided we all were." I sat at the table going through emails from the firm. Most were procedural notes about how my involvement in the Monroe case would be documented. Going forward, nothing unexpected. "What are you going to do?" I asked. She didn't answer right away, just turned the mug in her hands. Slowly, I went to the house this morning while Mom was still at the hospital. I found the jewelry box she mentioned. She walked over and set it down in front of me. Same blue velvet, same stiff clasp inside were birth certificates, old photographs, and a journal. It's Mom's handwriting. Amanda said she started it years ago but never finished more entries in the last 2 years. We sat side by side flipping pages together. Some dated back to before we were born, reflections on parties and travel and things she couldn't say out loud. Others were more recent memories of missed calls, regret over silence, her private grief about our father's choices. She knew so much more than she ever admitted. Amanda said, "I kept thinking she didn't want to see it, but she did. She just couldn't bear to live outside of it." I nodded. She wrote that she let Dad convince her we'd be better off apart, that it would protect you from my rebellion. Amanda closed the journal and rested her hand on the cover. I was raised to follow instructions to smile when told to smile and to ignore what I knew, if it threatened the picture. They painted. Her phone buzzed again this time, from Daniel's campaign advisor. She let it go to voicemail. "They think I'll read their statement and everything will be fine. You don't have to do what they say." "I know, but if I don't, they'll push for an annulment and claim I violated the prenup. They'll come after me legally and publicly. What do you want?" She looked at me, and for a moment her face softened. "I want to stop pretending that this is the life I chose." Later that afternoon, we visited Mom at the hospice center. They had moved her to a quiet facility closer to the city. Her room overlooked a garden with lavender bushes and a stone path. She looked smaller in the hospital bed, pale but alert, her voice low but steady. "You found it, didn't you?" she asked when she saw us. We nodded. I wanted to leave something honest behind, even if I couldn't say it out loud. Amanda sat beside her and brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "We've read every word." Mom smiled faintly. "I always meant to mail those letters. I kept thinking there'd be a better time. Then I realized there might not be." I sat on the other side of the bed, watching her chest rise and fall slowly. "What happens next?" she asked. "We don't know yet." A few days later, my supervisor, William Donovan, called me into his office. I was prepared for disciplinary action. Or worse, instead, he offered clarity. "Your role in initiating the Monroe case complicates things, but the Bureau's independent investigation holds. We've confirmed that the evidence remains admissible. Thank you for letting me stay on." He nodded. "You won't be assigned any more healthcare cases for the time being, but your work here is still valued." I returned to my desk with a quiet sense of balance, something that had been missing for years. Back at home, Amanda had begun applying for jobs in museum administration. She had a degree in art history that she'd never used, pushed instead towards socialite obligations and charity events arranged by our parents. "I always wanted to work in a gallery," she said one night as we sorted through her resume, "but Dad said it was beneath us." "What else did you give up because of him?" She thought for a long time before answering. "I wanted to study abroad, travel on my own, fall in love with someone who wasn't suitable. I wanted to stop thinking about how I looked in every photograph." She paused, then added, "When you left, I told myself it was because you didn't care, but now I know better." I nodded. We were told different versions of the same lie a month after the wedding. We received word that our father had requested to see us. We debated it for several days, then finally agreed to visit him at the Federal Detention Center. He sat across from us in a beige room, his suit replaced by a standard-issue jumpsuit, his hair thinner, his skin grayer. "This case will fall apart," he said before we could speak. "My attorney is filing a motion to dismiss based on conflict of interest. You should both write statements of support. We're still family." "Is that why you asked to see us?" "I asked to use us as leverage. I built everything for this family, for your futures, for your security. You owe me at least a public show of support." Amanda looked at him, eyes steady. "People died, Dad, and you're sitting here asking us to help you pretend none of it happened." He leaned back in his chair as if wounded. "Medicine is a business. Sometimes you make choices that don't look good on paper, but they're calculated risks. Every doctor takes them. You lied to your patients and to us." I said, I protected you. He insisted. I kept the truth from you so you wouldn't have to carry it. We left after 30 minutes in silence outside in the parking lot. Amanda stopped and put her hands on her hips. He hasn't changed, not one bit. He probably never will. She turned to me. Then we have to make sure we don't turn into him. We drove back to the city as the sun started to dip behind the buildings. The car quiet, but not heavy, just still at a red light. She reached for my hand and held it for a moment. No words, just that one small gesture. The leaves in Central Park had turned by mid-October, fiery reds and golds stretching across the skyline from my office window. I could see children chasing each other beneath the changing trees while I finished drafting a motion for a different client on my desk. Beside the files sat a framed photo of Amanda and me taken at the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, our arms around each other, our smiles quiet but real. Beneath it was a hospice schedule for Mom. Her condition had declined quickly in recent weeks. The press had died down. Most reporters had moved on from the scandal around my father. Though the headlines still lived online, archived and searchable, his name now linked with fraud, malpractice, and patient harm. My name, too, had been mentioned, though not with the same venom. I had been described as the estranged daughter and whistleblower. The attorney who helped build the case, the firm had reviewed my involvement again and ruled that while I could no longer take healthcare fraud cases, my work in other areas remained essential. William Donovan had even mentioned I'd be considered for full partnership in the next cycle, setting aside the personal complications. He had said during my review, "Your documentation was extraordinary." Amanda now lived 6 blocks from me. She'd found a walk-up apartment above a bookstore where sunlight poured into her living room in the mornings. Her new role at the Metropolitan Museum was temporary but promising. She was assistant to the exhibit coordinator, learning fast and gaining confidence. "I forgot how much I love this," she said one evening as we had takeout at her place. "Real work, not fundraising, not parties, just making things beautiful and meaningful. I'm proud of you." She smiled. "So am I, honestly?" For the first time in years, we visited Mom daily, splitting the time between us. The hospice nurses were kind. The room was filled with soft music and fresh flowers. Amanda kept a framed photo of all 3 of us on the bedside table, taken at one of those rare good summers in Maine on a clear Friday morning. The call came. Amanda's voice was quiet. "Rachel?" Mom passed in her sleep just after sunrise. The funeral was held at a small chapel outside the city. Just a few friends, some distant relatives, and 2 nurses who had grown fond of her in her final weeks. Attended, my father was allowed to come under heavy security, dressed in a suit instead of his jumpsuit, handcuffs removed for the service, 2 U.S. Marshals stood at his back. He looked smaller, more tired, but still watched everyone closely, as if calculating angles. The service was simple, honest. No attempts to rewrite her history. No elaborate eulogies, just real memories shared by people who had known her better in recent years. Amanda spoke first about her love of literature, the way she hummed old songs in the kitchen, how she taught us the names of flowers. I followed with a short memory about her teaching me piano, how her hands moved carefully across the keys, how her favorite music was always something slow and hopeful. When the service ended, guests filed past the casket to pay their respects. My father was last. He stood there for a long time, saying nothing. His shoulders hunched, his expression unreadable. Then he placed a hand on the casket and whispered something no one else could hear outside as the family gathered for the procession. He was allowed a brief word with us. "She loved you both." He said, his voice rough from emotion or age, "Despite everything we know," Amanda replied. "She told us," he looked at me, "I'd like to see you again before the trial." I didn't answer right away, then said, "We'll think about it." As the marshals led him back to the transport van, he paused and turned back. "I did love her, you know. In my way, your way," I said softly. "That was always the problem after the burial." Amanda and I went back to my apartment, too, drained for conversation. We sat side by side in the living room, watching the city shift from daylight to evening, lights blinking on, one by one. "What now?" she asked. "We keep going in the following weeks." She found her rhythm in the museum, taking on more responsibility, even curating a small side exhibit with guidance from her supervisor. I returned to court schedules and filings, balancing the weight of our family's unraveling with the structure of work. On a quiet Saturday, we drove back to Fairfield one last time. The house had been foreclosed and was set for auction. Most of the furniture had already been cataloged. We walked through the rooms slowly. The dining room where we'd sat through so many silent dinners, the staircase where we'd rushed down in holiday dresses, the backyard where we used to build snow forts as kids in Mom's closet. We found one last locked box. It contained birth certificates, hospital records, and a few old journals, scattered entries from her younger years, mixed with notes written in the months before her death. We sat on the floor and read through them, line by line, her handwriting familiar now like the shape of a memory. She was more self-aware than we gave her credit for, Amanda said, trapped and trying to do better, even if it was too late. We didn't take much from the house, just a few old photos and Mom's upright piano, the one we used to gather around on Christmas Eve. Everything else would be sold, the proceeds set aside for the Victim Compensation Fund. Our family's name and fortune dismantled piece by piece. When January came, the trial began. It lasted 8 days. The prosecution presented an overwhelming case, detailed records, witness statements, financial evidence. It was clear and damning. Amanda and I attended the opening statements and the verdict hearing. We avoided the middle days' too many stories, too many faces of patients who never should have been operated on after 6 hours of deliberation. The jury returned the verdict guilty on all counts at sentencing. The judge didn't hold back, Dr. Monroe, he said. You abused the trust placed in you as a physician for personal gain, resulting in preventable deaths and widespread suffering. The court sentences you to 18 years in federal prison. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered again, cameras flashing microphones. Outstretched, Amanda stepped forward, this time calm and clear. Today brings accountability, not celebration, she said. Our thoughts are with the families affected. We are committed to moving forward with honesty and purpose. That night, we hosted dinner at my place. Linda came along with a few close friends of ours, the people who had stood by us during the storm. The table was filled with casseroles and laughter, quiet music playing in the background. Amanda raised her glass to Rachel, who had the strength to walk away and the courage to return to truth and to justice. Linda added, and to both of you for building something better on your own terms. We clinked glasses and let the silence speak for a while, soft and steady in the months that followed. My father's sentencing. The days took on a quieter rhythm. No headlines, no hearings, just ordinary life finally allowed to take root. Amanda found a permanent position at the museum coordinating exhibits for the 20th Century Wing. She still lived near me, and every Sunday she came over for dinner, sometimes bringing a dessert she'd learned from a coworker. Sometimes just stories from her week. We kept Mom's piano in my living room. It hadn't been tuned yet, but on quiet evenings Amanda would sit and play the same pieces we learned as kids, her fingers a little rusty but steady. The house in Fairfield was sold. Most of the proceeds went to compensate the families affected by my father's crimes. There was no fanfare, just a clean break from the place that had once meant everything, and then nothing. My work at the firm continued steady and challenging. But with more balance, I had stepped away from healthcare fraud cases by choice, instead focusing on elder financial abuse and public guardianship cases, where the line between right and wrong often came down to small, overlooked details. One Saturday, Amanda and I drove out to the hospice to bring flowers to the nurses who had cared for Mom. We stayed for tea in the break room, talked with a few new patients, then walked the garden path behind the building where the lavender was starting to bloom. Again, she'd like this, Amanda said. Just us being here, doing something quiet and kind. I nodded. She always noticed the smallest things. The color of a leaf, the shape of a cloud. As we sat on the bench near the fountain, Amanda reached into her coat pocket and handed me a folded envelope. I found this last week in one of her books. It was addressed in Mom's handwriting to both of us. Inside was a short note written during her final week, My Girls. It read, I failed in many ways, but I never stopped loving you. I hope you find peace and truth and strength in each other. Forgive me when you can, and remember the good I once tried to give you. We read it twice, then tucked it back into the envelope without a word. Some wounds never fully close, but some do soften with time, with understanding, with choice. I still visit my father once every few months. The conversations are strained, mostly surface level, but I go not for him but for myself. Because closure isn't always about forgiveness. Sometimes it's about seeing the past clearly and choosing not to let it define the future. He still insists he meant well, still believes success justified the harm he caused, but he listens now in a way he never did before, and that matters more than I expected it to. Our last visit ended with him saying, "You turned out stronger than I thought you would." I didn't reply, just stood and thanked the guard on the way out. Today I live a life I built from nothing, not polished, not perfect, but mine. Amanda and I no longer talk about returning to what we were before. Instead, we talk about what we're becoming. Two women who finally see each other as whole. The journey from silence to truth, from exile to belonging, came at a cost. But it gave me back something far more valuable than reputation or revenge. It gave me back my sister. And if there's anything I've learned, it's this: truth has its own quiet power. It may not come when you want it or look the way you imagined, but when it arrives, it clears the ground so something honest can grow. If you've ever been cast out for speaking up or left behind because you couldn't pretend anymore, I hope you know you're not alone. Sometimes walking away is the first step toward finding your way back. Thank you for listening to my story. If it stayed with you, I hope you'll share it with someone who needs to hear it too.